Welcome to my video essay. I will be critically analysing the freedom and player agency in video games, while I apply key theories and concepts, and providing evidence both in video games and in real-world contexts. I hope you enjoy. In the eyes of Jesse Schell's art and game design, a feeling of freedom is one of the things that separates games from other forms of entertainment. He goes on to present the questions. When are players constrained? Are there any places that I can let them feel freer than they do now? Are there any places where they are overwhelmed by too much freedom? Schell believes that players don't need to feel true freedom, only the feeling of freedom. Furthermore, Schell explains that players can gain the feeling of freedom through indirect control with his goal of constraints that is created by the designer when that player has few choices. For example, the introduction of a new mechanic in a game franchise, like The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and its ability to build contraptions and using them to solve puzzles or defeat enemies. This is a freedom of creativity, and a sandbox of possibilities for the player, while being an intended mechanic of the game. The use of constraints allows for the designer to narrow down what the player can achieve. A simple request such as pick a color creates choice that can have a million answers like hot pink. But if you ask the question, pick a color red, green, or blue, it still creates choice for the player but narrows the player's options for a more controlled response. Jesse Schell continues by proposing another method of indirect control, which is visual design. Schell uses this example of two images to prove his point by explaining that a player's eyes will be drawn to the red triangle in the center of the photo because of the sharp contrasting colors. And for the second image, the player's eyes will be drawn to the edges of the picture as the yellow is more compelling to the eyes of the player. And by applying this idea to the design of the world that you are building, you can indirectly control what the player will look at and where they could possibly go if they see eye-catching visual design. This can even be seen in many real-world examples like the castle in the center of Disneyland, which draws the eyes of guests when first entering the park. Player agency, the degree of freedom the developer gives a player. This is the player's choice. Whether it is to kill an enemy or hide, it is the player's decision. Although the player might not get this in every game, it can contrast with the narrative that the designer is trying to tell, and the need for self-expression, despite many ludological theories like Schell's lenses being narrative inclusive and flexible, in comparison with Honecker, Blanc, and Zubek's MDA, Mechanics, Dynamics, and Aesthetics theory, which views video games as analytical and structured systems. Player agency only exists if there are resources for it, and show the consequences of a player's actions. Like in the Escapists, you get contraband and that item gets confiscated. The player agency of open world games. Games like The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim and The Witcher 3 are massively popular RPGs, known for their open worlds. Yet, both of these have their pros and cons. Exploration and the freedom to roam aids the creation of immersion by completing interesting side quests or beating dungeons that promote and reward exploration and allowing players to feel part of that world. Although open world games can be inviting, some may feel empty without the right detail or visuals design that Schell described, or even dilute the main storyline, according to Genius Crate. Personally, it can be a sense of dread if you're on one side of the map and must travel to the other side to finish a quest about returning an item to an NPC. Player agencies are an important aspect of open world games. They can allow players to feel clever when they find a secret area, or can create meaningful choices for the player that empower, impacting the world around them. For example, Fallout New Vegas and joining Caesar's Legion, which causes relationships with NPCs to decrease or increase, and some may even attack you. Open world games can keep players hooked, and even encourage replayability based on if there are challenges for the player and if the side quests are engaging. But many players can feel overwhelmed with the choice and choose to explore very little or even feel an open world fatigue due to the games market having quote-unquote too many games with large maps that encourage exploration and require a large amount of time to complete that players may not have, or simply lack the meaningful choices a player can make based on the designer's intended mechanics. Player agency is a vital and core concept to understanding games and their design, as the player will be the one to playtest, review, and enjoy the games that are released. Without the feeling of freedom that Schell described, the player agency diminishes, and the concept of the game would turn into an interactive movie, with the designer only telling their story rather than giving the player an immersive experience and getting exposed to the feelings and opinions brought upon them by wandering the world that has been created for them to play, whether it be out of curiosity, escapism, or to enjoy themselves. The player's freedom can define the entire game and its dynamics. Without the player or their agency, then you do not have a video game.